There we go. So, Josh got us into the first chapter of First Corinthians last week, and so wherever he is, thank you. Good job on that. But that's still where we're at. Okay, so we will be progressing in the chapter, but not yet making it to the next one. And so, believe it or not, this thing that's up on the screen right now is actually pretty carefully worded. Okay, it does not say why Christians offend. So that might be an interesting thing for us to talk about, but it's a different thing. Okay, Christians offend because they're obnoxious, and Christians offend because they're insensitive, just like other people. So we should maybe work on that, and we should maybe get better about that, but we cannot and we should not try to lessen the fact that Christianity itself contains a message that in some ways is universally offensive. And so, in the context of Paul's audience for this letter, the people in Corinth are really taking offense to the cross of Christ. So, the central cornerstone of the Christian faith offends people. And Paul's fairly determined to get this issue straightened out before he tries to make much progress in any of the other areas that these people need help with. So that's our topic for this morning. We're going to head into it in the text. And so we're starting here in verse 18. It says, "The message of the cross is foolish to those who are headed for destruction. But we who are being saved know it is the very power of God. As the scriptures say, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and discard the cleverness of the clever." And that's a reference to Isaiah 29:14. So where does this leave the philosophers, the scholars, and the world's brilliant debaters? God has made the wisdom of this world look foolish. Since God in his wisdom saw to it that the world would never know him through human wisdom, he has used our foolish preaching to save those who believe. It's foolish to the Jews who ask for signs from heaven, and it's foolish to the Greeks who seek human wisdom. So when we preach that Christ was crucified, the Jews are offended, and the Gentiles say it's all nonsense. But to those called by God to salvation, both Jews and Gentiles, Christ is the power and wisdom of God. So when you read this section here, you can see that it's not very far below the surface that there is some significant sarcasm from Paul. All right, and his tone is just a little bit like making it clear how silly this whole thing is. And most of what he's talking about has to do with this contrast that he's pointing out between the wisdom of God and human wisdom. And so Paul has essentially been accused of not being wise according to the standards of the current Greco-Roman rhetorical techniques that were fashionable in this time. So he's apparently not terribly charismatic in his delivery and not very nuanced in his adherence to their way of making arguments. He's just kind of laying things out in a reasonably straightforward way. And since he didn't much care to make people think that he was incredibly eloquent or whatever, he kind of left the impression with them that he just wasn't that wise. And therefore, the things that he is saying must not be that significant or maybe even correct. But he's firing back at them here with this contrast between the wisdom of men and the wisdom of God. And these two different kinds of wisdom go to very different places on all of the most important issues in life. So what is this thing, wisdom, that he's talking about here? The Greek word is Sophia, and it's not the same thing as knowledge. All right, and so to know things is one entirely different thing than wisdom, right? Like science is all about knowledge. And he's not really saying here that the knowledge that God has is somehow different than the knowledge that men can have. Knowledge is pretty much just the facts or the way that things are. But wisdom's different. Okay? Wisdom is about what you do with what you know. It's about interpreting and applying the things that you know in the light of the things that you value and the way that you see yourself and the world as a whole. And so I've heard it said, and you probably have too, that knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. All right, and so when you think about it that way, the wisdom of God is very different than the wisdom of man. The point of view of God is very different than the point of view of men. And you can see this play out even among different people, right? Like your kid may come home from school with a black eye. Clearly, there's been a fight or a scuffle or something like that. That's just like a fact. Something happened. That's knowledge. All right, but how you tell your kid to react to that and how you counsel him or her to deal with that situation is a matter of wisdom. And it turns out that you and your spouse may have very different ideas of how best this situation should be dealt with. Okay? You and the parent of the other child may have dramatically different ideas of how to deal with this situation. Okay? And it's based on what you value most and your general worldview. So without getting into which way is the truly wise way to deal with this particular situation, you can see that the wisdom of different people is often very different. Okay, your perspective changes what you think that wisdom is. So that's what we're talking about here. It's not the facts that are even in dispute. It's the significance of those facts and what they mean and what they lead to. That's the issue here. So this is a pretty important issue. It's part of our everyday life. It's part of how we as individuals and communities make decisions. All right, it is a big deal. And Paul says that the very biggest deal that has to do with wisdom focuses on the cross of Christ. So all these people that he's talking to agreed on the facts. Jesus of Nazareth died in 33 AD under Pontius Pilate on a hill outside Jerusalem. No one here disputes that. No one there disputed that. But what does it mean? Okay, and so here Paul says, when we preach that Christ was crucified, the Jews are offended and the Gentiles say it's all nonsense. And he's saying that from these two very different starting points, their wisdom drives them to very different conclusions about the significance of these events. That's what Paul gets into in this passage. And so we're talking about the great offense that is taken by both Jews and Gentiles at the cross of Christ. So we're just going to kind of chop that up a little bit. And so this whole discussion is about what we might think about the cross. And he says that to the Gentiles, it's just foolish. And to the Jews, it's more like a scandal. All right? And so why would it be foolish to the Greco-Roman mind? Well, the Greek philosopher Protagoras had said that man is the measure of all things. And in some rather important ways, this is an excellent summary of the Greek mindset. These are the primary people that Paul's talking to most of the time, and they're saying that right here with mankind as the starting point is where wisdom begins. It begins with the individual person. All right, it's my knowledge and my experiences and my values and my interests that are the grid that I fit everything that I learn into. And in that way, man is elevated to be the measure of all things that are even worth measuring. And when Paul is saying what he's saying, he's not belittling or down on the contributions that the Greeks have made. And neither should you or I be. Okay, in the book of Acts, Paul is quoting their own literary figures to them. All right, he has a very high view of what humankind is capable of doing. And I think that it's not too much to say that there has never been a more creative and inventive civilization on this planet than the ancient Greeks. Much of our mathematics, the origin of biology and zoology, all of our philosophy, all of our architecture, all come from origins that can be traced back to the Greeks. They really were a remarkable people. Okay, they really were great. But what's the measure of their greatness, and where is this wisdom that they have taking them? Okay, the ancient Greeks were not atheists, but they had gods that were very much created in the image of the Greek man. Okay, their gods were essentially glorified human beings. They had all of the greatness and all of the faults of any other person. They fought, they held grudges, they treated each other dishonestly. And this is because man is the measure of all things. Okay, and if man is so great and man is this way, then the gods must be this way as well. And that's about as far as the Greeks were able to penetrate into this whole thing. Okay, they did have very sophisticated arguments to reason for the existence of their gods, and we still use some of their reasoning for that today. They had fairly rigorous intellectual reasons for why a reasonable person would believe in the gods, but they landed at the limitations of their own experience. And so their gods were really just men. Okay, and that's just what Paul says here. It says, since God in his wisdom saw to it that the world would never know him through human wisdom. As important as human knowledge is, it does have its limits. Okay, as far as how much we can know. And we just cannot know the things that are related to eternity because we're so limited by our position in space and time. Okay, we can know that there is a God. The Bible does teach that everyone can know this. The Greeks had very strong arguments for this very fact, but they could not identify who God is or what it would mean to relate to God or what God might want. And that makes all of their speculations really just foolishness. The limits that their wisdom has makes it so that there's no way that they can answer the really important questions. Right? They can't answer any of the things that we just can't know. And the point that Paul is making is that the cross communicates something about who God is that human wisdom is never going to be able to reach on its own. Man is just not able to provide substantial answers to any of the questions that really matter. So That's what Paul's saying to the Greeks that he's dealing with here. On the other side, he's talking to these Jews that say that the cross is a scandal. All right, it's a scandal from the position of human pride. And the Jewish people here represent religious self-righteousness. These are the people that would claim that they are basically pretty good. The core of the belief is that if they apply a lot of moral effort to their lives, then they're going to be able to present themselves to God essentially as acceptable to Him. And that's the core of all religion. It's always about making myself better. It's about making myself presentable to God. It's about talking yourself into the belief that you really are okay because of the things that you've done or the things that you've not done. You've maybe done some nice things. You've maybe done more nice things than bad things. And if that's the case, then you're good. Okay? At least you're not as bad as your neighbor, so you must be okay. And that was certainly the Jewish mindset. And it's the mindset of religious people today. And with this mindset always comes the idea that God vindicates the good, who's always me, and He judges the evil, who is always not me. All right, and so we therefore divide people up into the good and the bad, or the just and the unjust. And it's just the way that human religious wisdom works. Instead of seeing us all as one humanity who all have the same problem and all have the same solution, the religious person sees people in these two different categories, right? Good and bad. And that means that for the religious person, the reality of the cross can be extremely offensive. All right, so let's look at the actual issue of the offense now. Okay, what do you say happened at the cross? And this is one of the most important questions. All right, it's the very question that Paul is going after these Corinthians with. And it's not a matter for them of whether or not the cross occurred. They know that this happened. But what happened when Jesus of Nazareth was hung on a cross and he cries out the words of Psalm 22, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani? Or, my God, why have you forsaken me? What did all that mean? This is where Paul's headed. And he's saying that what we have in the cross is an expression of God's wisdom. And it is so profound and amazing that no human being could ever arrive at it on their own. And this whole scene completely subverts the idea of the self-made and the self-righteous person. Right, and there are a couple of common options that the human wisdom comes up with for what actually happened at the cross. Some like to say that the cross was just the tragic death of a historical figure. Okay, historians from all kinds of backgrounds have tried to reconstruct just who Jesus of Nazareth was and what the cross really was from a historical point of view. And they usually come to something like one of two conclusions. All right, and the first is that no matter how good a man is, an evil government is still really bad. All right, and the tyranny of the state makes this really good guy into a martyr. And Jesus is just a hapless victim of a cruel system. Okay, but history is like chock full of people that fit that description. Right, there are lots of those. So some people come to a little bit different conclusion, and they would say that the cross is a picture of genuine foolishness. They conclude that Jesus must have thought that he was something more than what he actually was. Okay, he thought that he was the Messiah, so he's willing to argue the case that the Old Testament makes against the religious elite of his day. He was willing to hang around with the people who were looked down on and point his accusations at the religious self-righteous, the Pharisees. And all that ended up being just too much for him to handle. All right? And it was too much for the Pharisees to handle. It was against their idea of common decency, and so they had to get rid of him. So the whole thing is really just about the foolishness of Jesus. Just crazy of him to think that he had something better to offer than their own religious traditions. It was just foolish for him to make the claim that he was equal with God and to proclaim himself the answer to the most pressing questions that human beings have. He's just a fool, or he's completely crazy. Okay, sane people do not walk around claiming to be God. So those are basically the conclusions that people generally draw about the cross. But there is another conclusion that you can come to if you take the perspective of the Bible. Okay, and that is that the cross of Christ is the absolute focal point of all of human history. Okay, it was what everything before it was leading towards. And everything since the cross is the unfolding of the implications of the cross. What happened at the cross was God revealing who God really is. Okay, the Greeks could not figure out who God was. All religious systems have their various speculations about who God is. Some of them say that he's a little bit like a senile old man. Okay, that's just like, whatever, man. It's all good. Some view him more like a cosmic policeman that's just waiting to bop everyone with his stick if they get out of line. They all view God in these various ways. And so, who's to say which one's right? Okay, you ever ask yourself that? Who's to say which view of God is correct? And the obvious answer is that it's God that can say what the correct view of God is. And the claim of Christ and the claim of the Scriptures is that God did what man could never do for himself. God took the initiative to enter into history and reveal himself personally to his creation in the person of Jesus Christ. And the cross is the culmination of that revelation. It's the cross that's the very essence of who God is. Okay, and he made that known to humanity at the cross. And in the cross, we see the absolute justice of God and his complete inability to embrace any moral imperfection at all. Okay, he's a holy God who must move in justice and in judgment against human rebellion. He will not move away from his justice in any way. But at the very same time, He's a God of love that's willing to take upon himself the full weight of his judgment against sin by absorbing your penalty and mine upon himself. And so the justice and the love of God come together in perfect harmony in the cross of Christ. And it really is just incredible. God is perfect, just love. The Bible is also very clear that in the cross we see the triumph of mercy. Okay, God will judge, but he chooses to take that judgment upon himself. And so mercy is the outstanding characteristic of God's revelation to us about himself. When the question of what God is like comes up, the cross is the answer that God gives. He wants to extend to you his mercy. The very simplest version of the message of Christianity is the cross of Christ. And there is a part of this message that's offensive. Okay, in chapter 2, Paul says that he came to the Corinthians with one message, and that is that Christ and him crucified. Okay, that message is pretty offensive for a lot of people because it calls the religious and the irreligious alike as sinners before God. And this message takes the person that is themselves the measure of all things and the person that's basically good and places those two people in the exact same spot. It says that everybody needs the cross, and they need it in just the same way as everyone else. Okay, there are not two classes of people, good and bad, righteous and unrighteous. Okay, we're all human, and we're all alienated from God. We all need his mercy, and that is just what we find in the cross. There's mercy and forgiveness. And by its very definition, forgiveness means that there will be an innocent suffering. Okay, any time that we forgive a debt of any sort, we are absorbing ourselves the cost associated with that debt. Okay, if I forgive a loan, the debt doesn't go away. The money doesn't reappear. It's just that I've chosen to absorb that money into myself. I paid the debt, right? And so God is saying that you owe him a debt. It's a moral debt that you incur because of the deficits in your moral life. And to forgive that debt is to absorb its cost. And that cost is the life of the Messiah, who was God himself in the person of Jesus Christ. And that's actually really hard news for both the religious and those that are not. Okay, it's hard to hear that all the effort that you've put in to demonstrate to God that you are good enough has done nothing to do so. And it turns out that all that stuff you did was actually just about your own pride. It was all just you trying to convince yourself that you are less in need of mercy than the people around you. God says that this thing is categorical. Okay, we all are in need of mercy to the exact same extent. This is total grace for a total need. And so this is a thing that human wisdom could never come up with. All right, it just can't get there. This is a revelation of the wisdom of God. Okay, so we're going to spend a few minutes taking a look at Paul unpacking the implications of this. And so how does grace transform the church? So this is picking up in verse 30. It says that God has united you with Christ Jesus. For our benefit, God made him to be wisdom itself. Christ made us right with God. He made us pure and holy, and he freed us from sin. Therefore, as the scriptures say, if you want to boast, boast only about the Lord. And so that last bit is boosted from Jeremiah. But that would be a boast that's worth something. All right, and so what he's saying here is actually pretty cool, and Paul is applying the cross. He says three things about it that we're going to go through. All right, so the first one has to do with reconciliation. Okay, the Christian message is a message of reconciliation. It's through the cross that God's able to draw to himself relationally people who are alienated from God. God's a relational being. Okay, he's a person. He has a will. He has the desire and the capacity to experience love relationship. And the good news of the cross is that any barriers to that kind of relating have been taken out of the way. Okay, the gospel is the story of how we can be reconciled to God. And then, because we are reconciled to him, he calls us to relate to him as his children. Okay? Not as people who don't belong in his presence. All right, there's an interesting bit of wisdom here. Since he calls us to relate to him as our Father, and this is the real point of emphasis in the New Testament, then this has implications for how we live our Christian lives. Okay, we are called around his table as his daughters and his sons. And he's given up quite a lot to have the possibility of relationship with you. But almost unfathomably, he has given up the same amount to have the possibility of relationship with the people that you do not like. Okay? And the people that you think that you are better than. And so some of us have a diminished view of God as Father because we have a diminished view of any kind of father or any other kind of authority. There's a pridefulness in you, and there's a pridefulness in me. Okay, I despise asking for things or asking for help because it kind of communicates that I can't take care of my own business and I'm not good enough, right? You know what I'm talking about? But in light of the reconciliation that God has granted to us, we approach a heavenly Father that delights in giving us things. And do we ask him for the blessings that are our heart's desire? Do we really ask him for the things that we need? Christ made us right with God. Okay, it's not just you. It's us together. We're all approaching him as Father. We're family, brothers and sisters together, and God calls us to a family loyalty, okay, not to a sibling rivalry. All right, we're somewhat broken, all right, and it's partially evidenced by the way that we relate to our real brothers and sisters. We carry that brokenness into the way that we relate to our spiritual brothers and sisters. Okay, we develop rivalries and competitiveness with our brothers and sisters. We have all kinds of tendencies in our relating that are destructive to the idea of family loyalty. We have trouble being for each other. And a healthy family is for one another. A healthy church community is also for one another. Not a bunch of individuals that are coming to get what they want and then proceed with life on their own terms. Okay, that would be a very dysfunctional family of takers. And so some of us have a little trouble in our relational experiences because we have a dysfunctional posture towards the people around us. Okay, but one of the things that it means to be reconciled to God and reconciled to each other is to be for one another. And if a whole group of people believe that and we're doing that, that would be something cool. All right, it would be a very attractive community that God could really use to draw people to Him. Okay, and so is our reconciliation with God manifesting itself in the way that we live together? Are you really for the people that you're in community with? So second thing here, Paul says that he made us pure and holy. That's quite a statement to try to apply to me. But that's what he says. All right. And so what that means is that when we receive the forgiveness from Christ, we become different people. Okay, the Christian life is not about prideful self-improvement or trying to make ourselves better. Not about trying to make ourselves good. Okay, that's religion. It's not the cross. It's not Christianity. It's not the gospel. Okay, the cross is about recognizing that God has adopted us into His family, and He's made us new in Him. We're new and holy, just as He is. And so we're able to be delighting in who He has already made us. Okay? We delight in who He has already made us. You are the righteousness of God in Christ. All right, that's what Paul says. And it's not because you're so great. It's because His mercy is so complete. Okay, God doesn't look at you through the lenses of your failure, but through the lens of His Son. And through that lens, you are complete in Him. And that means that we should not just be delighting in who God has made us, but also in who God has made the people around us. This is where this starts to break down for me. Okay? I can actually start to get my head around the fact that I am forgiven and I am made righteous. But it's a little bit harder for me to swallow that you are forgiven and you are made righteous. Okay, you just don't seem quite ready. Right? Can you relate to that? You know what I'm talking about? Okay, and of course God has forgiven you. Okay, but that one guy in your group or your spouse, right? They've got some growing to do before they're ready to be forgiven. Right? See how we mess this up? And so in the corporate context, we need to be cultivating a culture of gratitude. Okay, you are a gift to me because God has made you and placed you in this body, and you have a valuable role to play that no one besides you can play, and it contributes to the health and the growth of the whole body. All right, and do we really feel that way? Do we pray that way? Do we communicate that to the people around us, to our spouses? Okay, and if we're not moving towards this in a somewhat like disciplined way, then we will end up taking everyone for granted. We will assume that they know how much we love them or that we're glad that they're there. But it doesn't work that way, does it? Right? I'm sure glad that came back. I don't know did it blink on your screen? All right, so I just totally lost everything on my screen. But it came back. So, how many great marriages are there out there where no one communicates just how much they appreciate the other person? None. It doesn't work that way, right? Like, people don't operate that way. It's our job to come alongside people and encourage them and relate to them right where they are. We are told to encourage one another more times in the New Testament than we are told to do any other thing with one another. And so we need to figure out how to get past our pride and our ego and express to the people around us our gratitude for them and the high value that we have for them. And a lot of us are a lot more preoccupied with how we can be better than how we can help the people around us. Okay, and a lot of us have all of these protections in place, and sometimes we may try to reach out to people, but it's not received very well, or people don't act or react in the way that lives up to our expectations. And so these things add up over time, and we're kind of nursing hurts. And dude, every one of us is in the same boat here. We need to be encouraging one another. And we need to be keeping one another in the fight. And so gratitude for one another and expressing that gratitude is pretty much the key to longevity in the work that a community of Christians can do. Right? It builds trust and it makes people know that they're safe to hear that they're valued. All right, last little deal here that Paul brings up is that he freed us from our sin. So this is what the word redeem means. Redemption is a religious word for most of us. We're not even really sure what it means. We certainly don't use it outside of church. It literally means to buy out of slavery. Okay, the Bible teaches that we all have a sinful nature and that we are prisoners to that sin that we have. And redemption means that God has bought us out of that status of being slaves. We're released from the power of the control of sin in our lives. We're released from the power that sin has to control the eternal outcome of our lives. And that's pretty good news. You are a very sinful person, okay, but you're not a slave to that sin. Christ has set you free. It's an important thing to get your head around. We have all of these behavioral habits and emotional habits, okay? You think that everyone's out to get you, and you're wrong, okay? You think that everyone just loves you, and you couldn't be any more wrong. All right? You're selfish, and you stubbornly refuse to forgive people. You're bitter. You're self-righteous. You think that because someone else struggles with something that you do not, that you're better than them, and that everyone would be better off if they were more like you. Okay, we're very sinful people, but we're not slaves to sin. Okay, we've been freed from that slavery. And that means you. it also means the person sitting next to you. If that's true, then it means that we're able to be involved in one another's lives with a perspective of hope. Okay, there's real change possible for you. And there's real change possible for that person in your group that you look down on. Okay, a maturing Christian is a person that is experiencing broader and broader ranges of freedom over the many and varied sin issues of their life. I didn't mean to hit that. Going crazy here. Even the things about you that you believe can never change actually can. Okay, the things about your group or the things about your spouse that you think can never change actually can. But they are a lot more likely to change with you coming alongside and encouraging and being grateful for them than they are with you sitting off to the side and judging them or badgering them about it. Okay, a whole ton of people here may feel trapped by their own habits or their life situation or their marriage relationship. But I believe that it is really true that most of us are just a couple of good biblical decisions away from being freed in all of these areas of our lives. And by decisions, I'm talking about our willingness to go before God and repent or change our minds and change direction about these deep loyalties that we have to these defects in our character. Okay, we agree with God that these things do not define us and they are not who we now are. Okay, we're released from the power of sin. Okay, we're redeemed. This is a wild and supernatural demonstration of the wisdom of God that we're talking about. Okay, and again, he does use the word us. Okay, he freed us. Not talking about individuals alone, he's talking to communities. And what does it really look like for us to experience a triumph of grace in the lives of the people around us? We need to be helping one another toward freedom. And this can have a heavy price tag associated with it. Okay, a lot of us don't really want to be free. All right, we kind of like our little pigsties. And to call one another to freedom means to wade into someone else's pigsty. Take them by the hand and help them see a way out. But you can't really wait until they're out of the pigsty to come alongside them and to be encouraging and grateful for them. See what I'm talking about? You have to go in there and be willing to go deep in their, muck. Okay, you have to be willing to tell them that they are living things and doing things that are all kinds of screwed up. You have to be able to tell people that the lens that they're looking at things through is just wrong. Okay, you're not honoring your wife or your husband. You're missing the blessings that God has for life because you're too preoccupied with your own thing. All right, there's all kinds of things that people need to be called out on, and we should be calling them out. All right, but let me be really clear about this. If a person does not already know that you love them and you value them and you're grateful for them, then telling them how screwed up they are falls on completely deaf ears. All right, you're just the voice of the teacher in Charlie Brown, right? Wah, 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 wah. You have no voice at all if you're not right there with the person, loving them just as they are. And so it's an absolute triumph of grace when we really get involved in one another's lives and we call each other to freedom, like what this is talking about. Is that for me? Is that like time's up? Some of us can be difficult to call out, right? We're not just a pig in a sty. Okay, we're more like boars with tusks, and we make people pay when they get in the sty with us. And so the cross of Christ is God coming into the world and taking upon himself the entire body of what is screwed up about you. All right, he already paid for that stuff because he loves you. And now, as his people, he's calling us toward one another so that we might be agents of freedom for one another. All right, so that's what this is all about. And everything that Paul has to say in this fairly complicated letter is shrouded in the hope that the cross provides. Okay, we need to stand firmly on the ground that we are already right with God, and so is that person next to us. Okay, we're both beautiful and holy and meant to be used by God as instruments in the lives of the people around us. All right, so that's the main thing, is setting the stage for the place where Paul's going to go with this, but that's what we have for today.